Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. Joining me today to share her personal 10 best spiritual books is mystical physician, rock whisperer, international speaker and seminar leader, Dr. Christine Page, who's been a pioneer in the field of healthcare for over 45 years. The author of 9 books, including Frontiers of Health and Spiritual Alchemy, Beyond the Obvious, Bringing Intuition into Our Awakening Consciousness, and The Healing Power of the Sacred Woman and the Heart of the Great Mother. Dr. Christine Page joins me now to share the stories behind the 10 books that had the biggest influence on her life journey, and to explain to us why women are the foundation of the birth of new levels of consciousness. Dr. Christine Page, welcome.
Thank you, Sandy. It's wonderful to be with you and your audience. I'm very excited about sharing these 10 books.
Yes, and what great books they are too. And, you know, it's always interesting to see how many books come up again and again in people's lists. And, you know, you've got a few of them. So they're clearly books that have something to offer everybody. So tell us a little bit about you. You qualified as a doctor from the University of London in 1978 and as a homeopath in 1989. I love that you combined the two. So you truly were an early bridge builder between allopathic and complementary medicine.
That's true. And what I like to always say is that I was actually brought up with all of that, so that my mother and my grandmother, great-grandmother were all involved with spirituality and mediumship. And my mother had some very close friends who were homeopaths and healers. And surprise, surprise, that in Britain we have such a strong link to all these different ways, which are we call them complementary, not alternative. And I can remember as a medical student, you're being told, please leave this patient because the healer is coming to work with this patient. Certainly I, as a medical student, was not as high up. But I was brought up around the College of Psychic Studies and the Spiritual Association of Great Britain, both of which are over 100 years old. And my mother and I would go in on a Saturday afternoon and listen to someone talk. And it was often a channeler, or what we call a medium. And I say all of that because I recognized when I made this list of my 10 books that many of them were channeled. And my mother would always say, as would be my father, take what you believe from this and let go of the rest. We never were in a state where we'd say, oh, you've got to believe this one person. And we did the same with religion and politics and everything else. It was always like, if this resonates with you, go for it. If it doesn't, let it go. And I hope I use that same approach in my teaching and my care.
So you've been quite, you at a probably early age was exposed to quite a few spiritual books then.
Exactly. And I can remember von Daniken coming in, actually sitting in our sitting room and sharing how he thought the Nazca lines were runways for the ETs. And I was brought up with many of those spiritual books. But the list I have were, as you'd asked, were the ones that really had touched me probably in my later teens and early 20s, compared with probably everything as I'd been brought up with before that.
So was it hard to pick just 10?
That was not so difficult because I will say I love books, I have many, but every one of those books is my friend. I mean, I can go along my shelf and say, there's not a book here that I haven't read and gone back to. And I think that's the good thing about a book. If you read it and you never go back to it, it probably wasn't worth going to the first time. And so when I was going through this list, I saw that all the books I picked, and I rarely do this, but I had underlined words and really made a point of saying, that is a significant thing that I've just read.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So your first book is one that crops up again and again. It is Illusions, The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah by Richard Bach, which was published in 1977. Do you remember when you first came across this book?
I do, and I would say that the first memory, of course, I have to say Jonathan Livingston's Seagull by Richard Bach probably came in just a little bit beforehand. And then, of course, his other books, like One, I think was an amazing book where he describes this. So I'm saying I think Illusion came in the middle of this. And I don't actually remember putting my hand on this book, unlike many of the other books that I've listed. But I knew that this was someone who told a great story. And when I saw Illusions and some of the stories that he speaks about in that book, about how this reluctant Messiah was able to do so many different things, and how the way in which he weaved the story through his own love of airplanes and taking people on trips. Yes, it was just a magical story. And I think what I took out of it, if I may say, is it's okay to be reluctant. You know? It's okay not to be necessarily, we're talking about being a Messiah, but I think the reluctance to actually bring our gifts to the surface is real. And yet, I mean, I've lived a life of listening to my intuition and following it, not saying, wow, look at me, but more that there is no other way to go in my mind. You know, it isn't like, well, send me another message and maybe I'll follow that one. I have followed them on the first shot, and that's what I encourage other people to do.
The second book is Esoteric Healing, Channeled Teachings of the Tibetan by Alice Bailey. And when I was looking this one up, you know, to see when it was published, I got the date of 1972, but she actually died in 1949. So I'm not sure that date is correct.
And it's wonderful if anybody hasn't read Alice, I mean, obviously read her autobiography, or maybe it was a biography, but I think it was an autobiography. To talk here again, Alice Bailey was evangelical, if I remember. I can't remember which particular religion she was following, but this wasn't her way to say, I'll talk to a Tibetan who, maybe this whole theme of my books is there, this sort of, it wasn't what she wanted to do, and all of a sudden she's doing it. And I think reading her autobiography was fascinating for me because it really, again, talked to me of my own journey. And I do remember how I got to know about her, which was sitting on the South Downs of Britain and reading David Tansley's book, who wrote about radionics and the subtle anatomy of the body. And he mentioned Alice Bailey. Well, I just dived in there and it was like, oh my goodness, this was outside what I'd been taught in medical school. And I always feel that if we are not taken into mystery with a book we're reading, we probably are not reading the right book. Because it isn't about just reinforcing what I already know. I wanted to learn something, and I wanted to be, I'm very curious, but very mystified. And if anybody has read the Tibetan books, the Tibetan often says, I'm not telling you all of the story because you won't get it. It's like, oh, you're not ready for it. And I just love that idea. And I always say when I'm talking to anybody about Alice Bailey, you don't actually read these books, you dive in and out because they are so intense. But I have got several of them. I've got probably the whole set, but esoteric astrology, white magic, all of these have been a profound teacher for me. And the healing, esoteric healing became the forefront of why I wrote my first book, which was Frontiers of Health, all about the chakras.
It's interesting. I mean, you just said that you really enjoyed reading her autobiography. And one of the things that I'm learning from this book club, you know, is people like you, guests who come on, that you don't share much of your stories in other interviews, but in these interviews you do, and it's fascinating for us to know about your journey and the books that guided you, so that because we can relate to a lot of that.
Right. Well, I think, and I wrote in my small piece when there was an introduction you asked me to write, the story was, I think I was 5 or 6 years old, and the school report comes back and says Christine should read more. And of course, I was shocked. But what she was actually saying was Christine doesn't like reading in class. And that, what I realized, it's not just a shyness, although I was shy. I find when I'm looking at letters and words, I have difficulty making sense of them. But when I look at the big picture, I absolutely can remember everything. I have a photographic memory. So I don't like people ask me to introduce someone and I have to read out their qualifications. And I say, I'm not going to do that. That freaks me out, because I think I have a degree of dyslexia where I can remember anything, but just don't ask me to read it for word.
Yeah. Book number 3 is another one that comes up frequently, Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, published in 1946.
Yes, and my friend who I was introduced to this book through, which she has just passed, which I was feeling that this was very appropriate. She was in her 90s, and she used to tell the story, because she was brought up in Hollywood and around LA, of meeting a young Yogananda in a garden. And I think just that connection, again, of a humility, a man with a story. And the beautiful thing about this book is his own story again, just as you mentioned, and his journey into his understanding of spirituality, especially Indian spirituality. And I think the character that I really loved was Babaji. And Babaji, this interdimensional being that went in and out of the world. And some of those stories about, well, this is going to happen anyway. Don't interfere with karma. Don't interfere with what's meant. But we can also, move it on quicker than we need to. But there are certain things we all have to go through in order for our soul to grow.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book. I actually bought the CDs, and I think there was about 20 CDs in the set. It was so long, but I really enjoyed listening to it.
Yes.
It, gave it a whole other dimension. So book number 4, To Hear the Angels Sing. I don't know this one. An Odyssey of Co-Creation with the David Kingdom by Dorothy McLean. I do know of Dorothy McLean. This one was published in 1983.
And I went to Findhorn in 1984, so it was just about that time. And I think everybody's had that experience, I always say, where someone says, have you read that book? You're sitting in another seminar on a plane or a train or whatever. And I have to say, at the time, there was a little bit of arrogance in me. They said, oh, I'm sure I have. Well, then I ran home and found I hadn't ever heard of Findhorn and really what was going on. And that was a good learning, not to be arrogant. But I think that, I'm sure, again, lots of your listeners will go along with the idea that sometimes we buy a book and we put it on the shelf. And then 5 years later, we see this book and we go, oh my goodness, this is the book. And it's just been waiting for us. Now, in my case, I went to Findhorn. I hadn't heard about Findhorn in that time. It just changed my life. The introduction week is an amazing week. Everybody should go on one. But it was like not just about growing large marrows or cabbages. It was about that connection and that communication with the nature kingdoms, which was so part of my upbringing, but I hadn't really put those 2 and 2 together. And when I read this book again, probably for this book club, I couldn't believe, as you said, it was published in the 80s, and I think she lived a good ripe age. But actually what she's teaching about is not about elementals and fairies. She's talking about consciousness and the Deva kingdoms and how they create the etheric body for everything that's on this planet. I was just blown away again reading it recently.
Yeah, fabulous book. Holographic Universe. This one comes up a lot as well. Michael Talbot. That's book number 5, and this one was published in 1991.
So I can remember finding this book in a bookstore on the big island of Hawaii in Kona. And it was one of those books that just jumped out at you. And what I felt that this book was allowing me to remember who I was. There was so much in it that I didn't understand. Again, I think that's a great thing. My brain couldn't understand it, but my heart could. And I really enjoyed that. And, I still go back to that book because it's just, again, got so much depth to it. Interesting, both Michael and David Tansley both died soon after writing these books of unusual cancers. And one thinks about these people, I'm sorry, don't write a book, it's not going to kill you. But the fact is that both of them were meant to bring these books through. That clearly that was one of their missions.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because, I mean, there's a faction that would say, oh, they were offed because of they're giving information that's,
I think it was, they were, I mean, I have to say this was before those times that both of these died, and they, I think there are other people who have, yes, they've had strange cancers, but these people dedicated their lives, if we're going to thank them that way for doing that.
Yeah, amazing. Book number 6 is Heaven's Mirror, Quest for the Lost Civilization by Graham Hancock, one of your heroes. And this was published in 1996. He's been at it a long time.
He has, and I'm just watching the second series of Ancient Apocalypse, and I'm loving it. I think he's such a brave character. I've met him personally, I've traveled with him. Just someone who has taken beatings from archaeologists and other people who have called him a pseudoscience, and it clearly comes through. But they also, of course, say he's racist, which, is so ridiculous since he's married to this wonderful Indian lady, and has been for a long time. It's just anything they can throw at him. And it's really a symbol of just how, for my part, he has really done this work. Because I was just listening, he'd been to Egypt 30 odd times, and he's done this and done that. He doesn't just do it once and then come up with a theory. He goes back and back, and what he does is put together similarities. And I've just come back from Easter Island, which was wonderful seeing these Moai, but I could see similarities in Bolivia and Scotland and Greece and Göbekli Tepe, which I've visited. And it's like, why wouldn't you want to see these connections? You don't have to agree whether the date was this or this. What you need to say is, who are these people who could travel around the world with the same symbolism?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It always makes me laugh when people talk about pseudoscience. I mean, the essence of a scientist is somebody who's curious and always looking, and always got an open mind.
Yes.
And yet, so often we see that they don't have such an open mind.
Right. And, science is to learn and is to grow and to know. And, someone who, and I saw that in my own world, as a doctor, where someone would say, you don't believe that rubbish homeopathy. And I said, how can you watch people die and not think, is there something more I can do? To me, that's the limited mind of a scientist, where they don't care about the people they're trying to help, but more about their own ego, if I've got to say it that way.
Yeah, very true. Book number 7, I loved this book. The Magdalene Manuscript, The Alchemies of Horus and the Sex Magic of Isis by Tom Kenyon and Judy Sion, published in 2002. This book took my breath away.
I agree. And again, I had the privilege of meeting up with Tom and Judy and traveling with them down to south of France for the different sites that Mary Magdalene was said to be associated with. And again, Tom tells this story of, that he's a psychologist, he's into the mind. He wasn't going to channel Mary Magdalene. I mean, he very much enjoys women. I mean, he's very faithful for the fact that he wants to promote women, but he wasn't going to do channeling. And it was almost like she said, you're not moving from this bedroom until you start this book. And, she even said, do not change one word of the book. You'd say, well, this sounds better. Nope. So this rhythm of the words and putting a book together is so important. And yes, it's a fabulous book. It really shows where Mary Magdalene was an equal to Yeshua, to Jesus. She had her own she has her own following. She was a master in her own right. And then Judy Sion's story in the end of it, really puts together how women have been put down, but now are coming to the fore.
Yeah, which is, what you're writing about in your books.
I hope so, because the truth is we were not always like this. And I think anybody who says women have never been empowered have never gone back longer than 3,500 years, where women were very powerful, and not powerful over, but with their sacred warrior partners.
Yeah, I think people forget, we were designed to have this flow between us.
Yes.
We weren't designed to be like one another.
No.
And we were designed to complement one another.
Yes. And I will say personally, I got to a stage where my guide said to me, "You've become too complete." In other words, you've actually married the male and female, and that finding a partner, which I did 20 years ago, a wonderful man, but he's complete. He literally allowed me to step more into the feminine so I could really grow there rather than trying to just keep that marriage within myself.
Yeah. So book number 8, another one that I've read and really did make a big impact on me. I read it soon after it came out. The Only Planet of Choice.
Oh, yeah.
Essential Briefings from Deep Space, channeled by Phyllis Schlemmer and Paulden Jenkins.
Yes.
1993, yeah. Amazing book.
And again, a channeled book. I'm sorry, everybody. This is me and my channels. But the fact that it went on for, I think, a couple of decades, and Gene Roddenberry became part of this. So this was a group who contacted what they called the Nine, who were seen as galactic beings. I mean, again, you can choose how they speak about it. But really their wisdom about who are we and why are we here. And so Paulden and the others all asked the questions, and then they would bring the answers forward. And they did this for years. And you can, again, dip and dive into this book. You can take bits out of it you like or don't. But I think that I want to put across the title, The Only Planet of Choice, is we were just meant to come here one time and have free will. So choice means having free will. This is the only planet where we have a fiery core to our planet, which brings creative free will. Other planets just keep doing the same thing. But we just keep coming back. And I think that's it's interesting when I read that, it's like, no, this wasn't a planet of choice in that way. It was a planet to make choices. And sometimes we refuse to make choices. We just keep doing the same thing and waiting for a different result.
Yeah. There are rumours that Roddenberry's, Star Trek was actually inspired by those sit-ins.
Oh, I've no doubt. And you could hear, if you read the book, Harry's asking the questions. Well, what about this? Obviously, he had ideas, and then he could play them out against these amazing beings who came in to talk to them.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a short break now. You're listening to a No BS Spiritual Book Club interview, and sharing the books that had the biggest influence on her life journey is mystical physician, international speaker, seminar leader and pioneer in the field of healthcare for over 45 years, Dr. Christine Page. We'll be back with more from Dr. Page after this break.
Welcome to Om Times TV.
Maya Angelou once said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and when I'm not hosting Om Times Media's flagship radio show What Is Going On and the No BS Spiritual Book Club, I help people share their untold stories. Books are my life, my joy and my passion, and there is no greater reward than helping aspiring writers get their books out of their heads and into the hands of those who are waiting to read them. If you feel that you have a book in you but don't know where to begin, visit sedgbeer.com. Click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you've been looking for. That's sedgbeer.com, sedgbeer.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Everything that we do, we can do in a contemplative manner. Through the art of contemplation, you can use the gene keys in a really powerful way. Gene Keys is basically the code book of life. In the Gene Keys, the book is made up of these three levels: shadows, gifts, and siddhis. And the journey is through those three levels, kind of unpicking of the shadow states, the releasing of the gifts, and then the embodying of this higher consciousness called the siddhi. And the siddhis are very exalted words. And it's not like we kind of suddenly are all these exalted Christ-like beings, but we have flashes and illuminations along the journey. And the more we get stuck into the journey, the more illumination comes to us, because the more we're releasing the light from in these codes inside our DNA. So all those revelations are inside us. So the contemplative way is the inner way.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Book number 9, The Emerald Tablet, Alchemy for Personal Transformation by Dennis William Hark, never sure how to pronounce his name, published in 1999.
You know, I love alchemy. I'm an alchemist. I love everything about the alchemy. And it was when I was looking to choose a book, this was the one that probably I had spent more time reading, because everything I've done, including as an astrologer, I love the psychological astrology. I love the psychological homeopathy. And in this book, he connects the psychological tendencies of alchemy. Now, if people don't know alchemy, it's about taking base metal and making it gold. But it's also about taking base consciousness and making it gold of enlightenment. And that's what I love. And one of the pieces, again, if you've never looked at the Emerald Tablet, please do so. It was seen to be a tablet. Sometimes people talk about there were 12 or 13 of these tablets, where engraved into them, probably with the third eye, into an emerald, were these words of wisdom. And it is said, and when you read the Emerald Tablet, it's not long, it has this energy to it, talking about how we become this enlightened being. It is said that this was the tablet that God gave Moses the first time round. And that when he gave them this gift, of course, when he went down the mountain, he found that they had melted the gold into a golden calf because they weren't ready to move into the age of Aries. They wanted to stay in the age of Taurus, the cow. So he got so mad, he crashed the tablet, went back up the mountain and said, "Oh, God, did you see what they did?" And God gave them the 10 Commandments. But actually, when you look at it, the 10 Commandments, and one could say are a rule-based experience, but they have a strong connection to the Emerald Tablet. So I've kind of deciphered the two. Ending that story is God said, take that golden calf, melt it down, make it monoatomic gold and give it to the people. And that was that's manna from heaven. So monoatomic gold is the thing. And once they took the monoatomic gold, they were transformed and were willing to move forward. There we are. That's a complete story.
Wow. Interesting, very interesting. I've heard about, you get these phases. Monoatomic gold was around, several years ago everywhere, and now it's suddenly very quiet. And then I imagine people will discover it again. I mean, have you ever used it?
I haven't, but I met Lawrence Gardner again. He was going to go on my list, but I didn't put him on. He came to the College of Psychic Studies. I think that a lot of the monoatomic gold, I'm sorry to be saying, is not real. But if you haven't read Lawrence Gardner's book about how he says that it wasn't supposed to be a temple, he took the real translations. It wasn't a temple on the hill, it was a workshop. And he sees everything, the Ark of the Covenant, being an arcing of this gold to make monoatomic gold. So I think we try and do it the quick way. Oh, just break it down. No. This is something about higher consciousness being able to work at that arc level to create something that is amazing.
Well, you said something earlier that's intrigued me, so I'd like to take a couple of minutes to discuss it. You talked about psychological astrology and psychological homeopathy. And I'm not quite sure the context that you're using those, but I have certainly used homeopathy to change people's states of mind. Is that what you're talking about?
It is.
And could we use it for consciousness?
It is. Homeopathy, as you may know, when we're learning it, it talks about the physical and the mentals. It doesn't talk about the spiritual, but you've got that context there. I was never interested in whether or not I could heal your knee of something. I was always more interested in the mentals, what was going on in your mind. And that to me was always much more symbolic of making true changes, spiritual changes. Homeopathy is one of those energy medicines that can only work when we are at a level where we are allowing it to work. In other words, if we're still stuck in our fear and survival mode, it won't work. Have I seen homeopathy changing? I think most of the spirit world, our spirit is there waiting for us. Changing our mind takes us there. So awakening that mind to think that there's anything else is part of, I think, our spiritual development.
Interesting. So we come to book number 10, Shards of a Shattered Mirror by Darryl Anka, otherwise known as Bashar. And there were two books in the series. Book 1 was Cryptic and book 2 Nocturnal. These are fictional books, works of fiction, aren't they?
They are, and I had to put him on the list because I'm sure a lot of your listeners have heard of Bashar, have followed his teachings, and I have been inspired by him for several years now. And I just had to find a book, and I've read those books, which talk about, a process of change, which cryptics, nocturnal, shape-shifting, I forget the last stage, but he's trying to, in his way, I think he's a filmmaker as well as a writer, he's trying to tell a story that can help us to understand these states.
Yeah, and many people are doing this, they're fictionalizing because it's easier to digest,
Yes.
I think, and people are more willing to take it.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is very hard, and we've been talking about writings and books, and I've been very aware of what does it mean to expand consciousness or change our consciousness, and it isn't just about knowing something; it's about embodying that knowing, expressing it. And I had a friend years ago who was a medium and had been doing that for 40 years, and he said, I see people coming in on one level of consciousness and going out on exactly the same consciousness, even though they're doing all this reading and spiritual processing, because they've never embodied their remembering.
Yeah.
And I'm very keen on how do we tell a story that will wake someone up to something that's been asleep inside us.
Yeah. So we've finished with your 10 best. I want to talk about the healing power of the sacred woman and the heart of the great mother, because, this is the subject of our time, the rise of the feminine, etc. So what inspired you to write those books?
Beyond my book list, You know, there's a part where you suddenly, not suddenly, but you slowly realize that the influence of your guidance is more feminine than it is masculine. I remember someone I went to as a medium saying, you do know, Mary Magdalene's the person who's guiding you more than Yeshua or Jesus. And I went, yeah. And, I've never really bothered who were my guides as long as they came in with good information. And it resonated with me. I did have a very strong upbringing of matriarchal women, both my great-grandmother, my grandmother, my mother, and the men who adored their women. And I think that's really important to know. But, excuse me, the inspiration of this book was from a medical point of view. I realized women have no idea about their body, no idea physically about it, how it runs through cycles, how it's supposed to tune in with the moon, and its spiritual and creative function.
When I read that book, I came across something that I never encountered before. And, I was expecting it to be a little bit on the woo-woo side. Forgive me for that. But very, very grounded, very practical, and a lot of research in there. But the thing that, it interested me, and I had to tell my daughter-in-law, and I've told her she's got to tell her daughter, was the part where you talked about menstruation and it being a time. People talk about cleansing, and we had this whole thing in some cultures where the women are shut away in tents, and they're dirty and they can't come out till they're clean again. But what you spoke about was a whole other kind of cleansing. It was in the menstruation that the woman was able to shed and cleanse her body of thoughts, experiences in the previous month, which kind of, I think it's a wonderful thing to be able to say to a young girl, look, this isn't just the curse. Yeah. This is an opportunity where you can actually let go of the things that have happened to you and have almost a clean slate.
Right.
And I've never heard that before.
Well, thank you for that. I will say that I appreciate the meeting I had with a wonderful Native American who had not been indoctrinated with Christian beliefs, I have to say. And she gave me information about their rites of passage and how important this time was. And that they, even though she was a working woman, had 6 children, 6 boys and a husband, but during this time, she would take herself away from the men because she was so powerful. And I think that's another feature I put into the book, because during our menstruation, and it's interesting, we're talking on the new moon, which is also a very powerful time for women. This is a time where we are transforming, you could say, energy, emotions into blood in order to be shed. So it's this amazing ability. We take a few cells and we make a baby. That's amazing. But going the opposite direction, where we're breaking something down to shed it, is just as powerful. And she said, none of the men would want to be around me at this time. They would say, stay away, please go in your room. And I'm just going to tell this bit of the story, was that what the men did not want was her to make any food for them. And when I say that to women, they go, yay! But the men said, no, I won't eat the food that you've touched, because you're just putting back into the food I'm eating everything you're getting rid of for me. And so not only is it a process of our clearing ourselves, but women are transformers overall. I love you now, change. And that what we do is we take in a man or anybody around us energy and we get rid of it. We literally are vacuum cleaners for everybody's emotions that are stopping them living their lives. So it's so interesting. She kept telling us, like, you shouldn't be doing hairdressing, you shouldn't be doing massage, you shouldn't be touching people on the day, especially the first day of your period, because you're literally giving them all the energy that you're saying I'll get rid of.
Wow, fascinating.
So she would go to her room and she would love it. I mean, she said she had all her creative arts and everything, But the men would bring her food because they didn't want to feed her. Now, I've had women say, well, I'm going to go starving because I live on my own. That's okay. You can put your food in, in the freezer and take it out. But if you're living like your daughter, I think your daughter and your granddaughter are doing, then they can say, well, when you have a period, I'll look after you. And when you have a period, I'll look after you. That was the way it should be. Because you don't want to be eating the food of someone who is on their period at that time, the moon time, as the native people call it.
Why do you say that women are the foundation of the birth of new levels of consciousness?
Because through this cleansing process, and you've got to empty before you can start filling, then we give birth to this new process. And women have always had, during this moon time, and I always talk about a 3-day ritual. So for those of us who aren't bleeding anymore, it's the day before the new moon, the day of the new moon, and it's the day after. And here, the new moon is on the 1st of November. So today is my emptying day. Tomorrow is my connecting day. So the first day of the new moon day and the first day of your period is the day when you go back into the ocean of possibilities with the Great Mother. And men can't do this. So that ability to let go, it's not surrendering, but literally empty yourself of everything in the external world. And on that first day of your period or the day of the new moon, really just spend time connecting, deeply into the Great Mother. It might be on the earth, go for walks, but it might be meditation. And on the third day, you bring the new information forward and you plant that. And that's what they would do in ancient times. The men would all wait there, not just the men, but they would wait and say, okay, what are we going to do this month? And the women would go do this. And the men would go do, because that's what they love doing. I'm sorry, I'm stereotyping, but they would go off because they had a plan to do something. And the women could sit there for a month. I'm, again, making a joke. But then the men would come back and say, did it? We go, okay, well done. Let's go back in through this cycle again. So the process was that without women being able to dip into that, the ocean of possibilities, the divine consciousness, the universal mind, there was no new creation coming through.
And don't men have an opportunity to shed the things that don't serve them anymore?
It's not so easy, and it really is not part of their makeup. And last time we spoke about the women's work, it was through intercourse, making love, that women would, and again, it didn't only have to be, if we want to say through sex, but men could travel up the female ladder, serpent ladder, to reach the orgasm, which allowed them to make that connection. But that would, I'm sorry to say, men, it's only through the women doing the cleansing that you have that ability to climb. So I think that when women are seen as dirty, as you said, need cleansing, yes, we are doing the cleansing. And when women stop bleeding, that's it. And that's what I would say is, I mean, even as a postmenopausal woman, I can only do so much cleansing with my bit of water and putting my ideas onto the ground. The reason that we have, the one thing that every woman does is bleed. 40% of women don't have children, or I think 20% of 40-year-olds have not had children. That we don't all have children, but we all bleed. And when women stop bleeding, we have a problem, because it's the bleeding that empties us out. It's the blood of life that allows us to go to this ocean of possibilities. We make that reconnection through the water to the Great Mother.
So then what happens to menopausal women? Because isn't this also, my astrology teacher used to say to me that it was when a woman went through the menopause that it's like her energy, she's no longer parenting, her energy becomes hers. And this is why so many women kind of begin to find themselves, or, what they're going to do in the next phase of their life at that point in time.
It's totally true, because you're not doing this work anymore. But it is so important for women to use those 3 days around the dark moon to do the cleansing and the clearing, because this is the work. And what I find is that once we go through the menopause, we don't have this physical grounding anymore. It's really important for postmenopausal women to learn to root themselves into that root chakra underneath our feet. That is so vitally important for us to connect to the dragon energy, to the creative energy of Mother Earth. I also say to women is, if you no longer have a period, then I have to say the letting go can come out in other forms that you might carry coming out your nose, or it might come out in a cough, or it might come out in diarrhea. You know, basically, if you don't let go, the body will do something for you. So learning to let go, again, it's no good going into the Great Mother full of ideas. This is what I want to get from it. You have to let go. And you have to be empty of our beliefs about why I'm here on earth or what I believe to be true. That's where we're full of ourselves. I'm here for a purpose. No, you're not. You know, you are this month, then you empty out and you find a new purpose.
Is this why so many women are emotional and shed tears?
Yes, it is. It is. Part of that is, you know, they're not, I'm sorry to say, but they're not understanding that they're psychic, but it's not about them being connected to everything. So I'm often having to say to women, just because you know what's good for your daughter or your son doesn't mean they want to hear it. And so this empathy is not always a good thing, because it's often that we're losing sight of ourselves and we're often stepping into someone else's life path, which is not appropriate.
Yeah. So the women's mysteries that you share in those two books, I mean, are you following up with another book, or is that complete?
I have a handbook of women's mysteries, which I published myself, which has the rituals in it, and there's a lot of we've done a lot of downloads that you can get on MP3 downloads of all the meditations. I also have the Women's Mysteries online course, as well as a handbook of women's mysteries, as well as a homework of women's mysteries. I've tried it in many different ways of saying, please, there's information there. If you like meditations or visual imageries, they're there. If you want to read something, it's there. And I can't do more than that. I've done many teachings on this, but we have to practice. And again, it's not difficult. 3 days, 1 day a month, even if you just remember to let go, is a good start.
Yeah. Going back to books, you believe a good book should have a catchy beginning, a profound middle, and a resounding end. Would you say that all of the 10 books you've chosen today fulfill that?
I do. I think Bashar says, every story should do those things. It should grab you. It should leave you wanting more at the end. It shouldn't leave you saying, just as you're saying, where's the next book? Or I need to go back in and read that piece. I personally, I think if you can read a book and you're saying, okay, this person now is making a book, putting several chapters in just to keep repeating something, I think that's not where we need to be. And I think that's why people are enjoying short podcasts, because they get all the information in a shorter way.
Were there any books that you really struggled at having to leave out?
I think I've cheated and added a few more of those as I went along. Some of the Alice Bayleys, the Richard Bach books, the Lawrence Gardner book I would have definitely have put in. My husband said, aren't you putting that book and that book? I think I hope I put across my themes of loving the nature kingdoms, loving the sacred sites. I could have put more books on that. My alchemy. I tried to put, as a good Gemini, the range of interests that I have that are coming together.
Yeah. So if you were a book, what words would be used on the cover to describe you and the contents?
Well, I always see myself as a curious, innocent child. And I think all those words have relevance to them. That curiosity is there. I feel that I may not be answering the way you say, but in Harry Potter, when he opens the book and you dive into the book, I don't want a book where you just have one cover. I want it to be a book where, depending on the angle I'm looking at the book, I dive in and I read something different. That's the book I want to write and be.
So tell me about your rock whispering.
You know, I have an affinity with the Nature Kingdoms, thought everybody could, you know, feel energy coming off it. But I particularly love rocks. And I think I was a rock person once. I always make the joke that we are all, you know, we've been in the plant kingdom, we've been a rock person. And I always say, you know, being a rock person was really boring. You were there for tens of thousands of years. But I think that there's something about rocks, and I think that I've carved rocks. There is many people speak, of course, of using your intention to lift rocks, move rocks. I think I've known how to do that, but I've also known how to carve rocks with a great love and attention to the rock person within that rock. And I find that rocks, just for me, I can ask a rock what went on here, and it's like a video camera. It will just tell me everything that went on in the area because nothing else has been there for so long. And so I'm a little bit of a pain in the neck for archaeologists or people or guides, because I'll go somewhere and say, no, the rock tells me something completely different than you're telling me. And usually later on I find that I was accurate.
Yeah. So you've talked about meeting, you know, a couple of the people that the authors that you've written about. If you could have dinner with anyone on your list, who would you choose?
Oh, that's so hard. That is hard. And you're making me choose one. I don't think I can. And I know that's because I've had the pleasure of sitting with them. I am that curious person. I love hearing people's stories. So if anything, I would, you know, I feel I dived into many of their stories, but I'd love to know them at a deeper level. And maybe I got the chance with some of those. So some of the ones I haven't met, I would love to say, you know, tell me more about your inner life and what led you to do this, just as you are doing for me today.
Wouldn't it be great, you know, to have a dinner party and have them all there?
Yes, yes. And of course, I'll only relate to the parts that I want. I'm so much into holograms at the moment. I'm like, yeah, I knew you in that particular life, but I don't know the other parts of you. But this piece really resonates with me. And I think that's what a good book should do. It should allow us to go in at different angles at different times and say, wow, I didn't even read that line because I was coming from a different place.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, we certainly do learn a lot more about ourselves from the books that we read.
Yes.
I mean, and not only just because they're giving us information, but the way we respond and grow. And,
yes.
You know, and resonate too.
Yes.
Something we read. I mean, to pick up a book and to go, yeah, I know that. I don't know how I know it, but I know it. It's amazing.
And, you know, our conversation here is changing both of us. I find that when I'm in the nature kingdoms, like if I'm meeting up with a rock or a sacred site, not only am I being changed by its consciousness, it's changing. And I have this vision that as I'm reading that book is changing. It's almost, and would be the beauty, my Harry Potter way of seeing it, is that some pages would just disappear and other pages would appear because I've read the book.
Yes, yes, yeah, that would be really cool.
And I think it's why, you know, you and I might say, well, I love that page, and I'll go, I didn't even see that page. What page is that? Yeah. And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. Well, Christine Page, thank you for adding your 10 best list of spiritual books to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations. You know, what you and the other guests are doing is providing this incredible resource for people who are looking to grow and, you know, want some guidance along the way. So by sharing your list, you know, you're helping an awful lot of people coming after you.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you for the wonderful gift you give for me to share, and for everybody's come on your show. So thank you, and for the listeners.
Yeah. So you can learn more about Dr. Christine Page's books, private sessions, online courses, meditations, events and trainings at christinepage.com. This show is also available as a free downloadable podcast on the Om Times website and on Spotify, iHeartRadio, all the major podcast platforms as well. That's it for this week. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 Best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Till then, it's goodbye from me. And thank you again to Dr. Christine Page.